Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
There we go.
I was munching on popcorn and I thought, okay, if we were all gathered, we'd all be munching at the table, right? So,
Right.
sorry.
I think that's right.
I'm not sure about the nutritional content of the popcorn, but otherwise we're good.
It's plain.
Okay, fair enough.
Given that we are about nutrition on this call, I
That's
just want
right.
to say, let's just stick to our priorities. All right, I have to turn my space heater off. One moment, please. It's almost 50 degrees down here. Should I tell you that?
I'm in Portland right now, and I was just walking around outside without a coat on, and it feels like sinful almost.
Yeah, like exactly.
I'm doing something wrong.
Right, like that kind of decadent that you're like, I know I'm going to be punished because I was raised in a puritanical society.
Something
Nothing
terrible
good will
happened.
come of this. Exactly. Like nothing good will come of this. All right. Well, Meg, thanks for letting me know that you were going to be delayed, and we are. This is how life goes in Zoom organization land, and we'll just wait a minute.
Okay.
Let everybody get here and catch a breath. Was Bronson with you wherever you were, Meg? No.
No, he's actually off this week.
Oh, right. No, that's right. My apologies. I knew that. But we are expecting Aaron, right? And it seemed like Kate was online today.
Agreed.
I don't know about Rachel.
Rachel is here.
Oh, geez. God, I think I need coffee. Ew. I am missing all the obvious things. All right.
I think we're probably safe to go ahead and start. The recording has started, so folks
Okay.
kind of chime in if they miss the first little bit.
All right. Fair enough. Meg, any context you want to set from your vantage point before we get underway?
So the couple of things. One is that Amber, who has been supporting this initiative, has accepted a position with her first love at ACAP, which is the Hope and Prosperity Resource Center. So she will be doing more direct hands-on service with folks experiencing homelessness, living in poverty. And so she is an amazing resource in that regard. So, so that's one change. And then Bronson will be back with us next week. He is off this week. And the one other piece of context setting is that the CDC, we've talked until this point about not necessarily having any funding available going forward. And we have actually received sort of a preliminary notice that the CDC is going to make some funding available. What's interesting, I suppose is the right word, is that the grant applications for the funding will actually be due before this planning grant is completed. So the NOFO will be out, the notice of funding opportunity will be out in May. And then the grant proposals are expected to be due in July. And the funding, they are expecting to award up to 100 awards of a maximum award of up to $900,000. It's not clear over how many years. That information is in the Google Drive. So you can see that letter that was received. Thank you to Kenny for getting that information. And it has been loaded in that Google file. So if you are having difficulty with the Google Drive, let me know and I can send you another link. But to date, everything is in there, all of the resources that we have received. So far, there are subfolders there for data versus grant information, all of those things. So I think that's all that I have.
All right, thank you. And Keeney, I'm not sure if you know everyone or if everyone knows you. Would a round of introductions be helpful?
Please, thank you, Carol.
Yeah, Keeney, you want to introduce yourself and then we'll go around.
Sure. I'm Keeney Tinkham and I'm the Executive Director for the Maine Resilience Building Network. I live in Central Maine and I work with Sultana. I'm really grateful to be part of this grant in a supporting fashion consulting. And I'm here to listen and learn with you folks and grateful. And I have done other work with Carol as well. So thank you.
Thanks. You obviously know Sultana. Damian, you want to introduce yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
You can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name's Damian Lankwell. I'm located up in Aroostook County near Caribou. I work at a local radio station. I'm a musician, artist, activist. I have a record store in town. I focus on a lot of homesteading sort of things and community driven, absolutely. And I'm here to help. Anything I can do.
Thanks, Damian. Rachel, if you're there and you can hear me, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rachel Albert. I don't know when my camera's not working. Hi. Rachel Albert. I'm a nursing professor at the University of Maine at Fort Kent. I've been in higher education for 30 years. And also the presiding chair of the Aroostook Public Health Council.
Thanks so much. All right, well, with that, I'll just say, by the time we're done today, I think our goal is to be as clear as possible about information that's going to be shared with us. So we're in learning mode today, and the recording will help those who weren't able to make this time slot work, to be able to come along on the learning. And after we do the learning, ideally, we'll begin to think more about action steps and timeline and methods for community engagement. So more on that as we move through the meeting, but I think we're going to start by having some, as I put it in the agenda, planful discussion. And thank you in advance to Meg and Sultana for beginning to talk with us a bit about data and where we left off in our last conversation. So I'll just turn the floor over to the two of you. And if you want questions as we go, say so, or if you prefer we hold them until the end, we can do that too, but I'll leave that up to you.
Sultana, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. So I do want to say I have a little bit more of an interactive presentation. So we have fewer folks, and I was hoping to generate some discussion. So I have some reflection questions that I'm hoping that even though we have a small group, that we can have some conversation generated by our reflection questions. I have some slides prepared, and so if it's okay for me to just go ahead and start sharing my screen, is that okay? Does that work for everybody? Okay. And it's the way that I approach this also, and the way that I approach talking about these things is that I focus less on data and more about shared learning. So I'm hoping that that is the way that we will all approach this, is that if you have questions, please stop me. If you have thoughts or comments, please interject. The point of this is for us to be in community learning about these things. And if you have things that are helpful or thoughts that pop up, I would love to hear them, because I'm sure that you have experience and perspective that will be useful to me in how I think about and talk about these things. So that's my hope. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we will. Let me just open this up. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, great. So the way that I like to talk about social connectedness, and the way that I am currently thinking about social connectedness, is really from a framework that ties social connectedness and mattering together. And that's the way that I am thinking about it for us as well. Since we are focusing on young people, the way that I have framed this for us to be thinking about it is social connectedness and youth mattering. And I have some questions for us to be thinking about and some information to share with you, but I'm going to start us off with one question, because I think that there's a shocking statistic that is associated with this. So, how many people in your life are you close enough to share a personal problem with? And since we have so few people, if you feel comfortable sharing, please pop in. And if you don't, that's okay too.
You want me to, anyone to answer these? Is that?
Yeah, please,
Okay.
anyone, unmute yourself and pop in.
How many people in your life you're close enough to share personal problems? I try to keep communication pretty fluid and transparent with everybody. I think it's just an important way to do it. So pretty much anybody in my life, if I feel that it would either help them or help myself and not, be a bother to them, I'm very open to always communicate that sort of thing.
I like that answer a lot. Thank you. I was thinking about this, and I would say that I have between 15 and 20. I have a very large group of friends that I maintain that don't necessarily live close to me, but that I maintain really close connections with, that I would feel comfortable saying, I'm going through this right now. Is this a thing that I could talk to you about? That includes my family members, my friends, some colleagues. Anyone else?
I don't normally share much because I'm trying to be more of an observer, but at the moment I feel like I feel compelled to share because you both strike me as super achievers. I'm not sure if it's because I had a dysfunctional young life here in Aroostook County or what, but I maybe 2, maybe 3 if I'm pushing it.
There's no wrong answer here. And also, I would say that my answer is different today than it was 10 years ago.
I mean,
Okay.
as facilitator, I don't have to jump in, but I'm gonna, because I'm 63. And as a result of some of the youth mattering work that I did with Mervyn last year, I realized that I there were people who cared about me that I hadn't let in. And I redesigned my life. I literally uprooted my life. I sold my house and moved to another community to be closer to where the majority of my friends live. And since then, I've worked really hard at letting them in. Yeah,
Thank
so
I
at
can-
least a dozen. Yeah, which if you asked me this literally a year ago, I would have said 3.
I guess for me, this is Rachel. I guess for me, it sort of depends on what the personal problem is, how many people I would let in. And so, have a very large family. So, I guess it depends on what it might be. But I also found as I grew older that if it's, a complex, maybe a healthcare situation, initially I had a tendency to keep to myself, but then you find that if you open up, you do find people with similar issues or similar challenges that you can easily talk to. But I can't really put a number to it. It's kind of, I would say probably under a dozen.
Keeney, if you want to speak up, you can, but you don't feel obligated.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I think 2, I would probably say a dozen. Yeah, thank you though. And I think it's, holding on to some old relationships and new relationships and then those that are out there in our sphere that I've always been connected to that, just supports and there for me. Thanks.
So there was a study done in 2004 that surveyed thousands of people. And when I'm talking about surveys or data, I'm always talking about things that are happening in America. So just for context, I'm always talking about the United States. So the mean was people said that they had 2 people, but the mode, so more than 25% of Americans said they had no one that they could share a personal problem with. Now, this was in 2004, and that number had decreased from the 1980s. So in thinking about what that means for us today after the pandemic, as social isolation continues to increase, I can only imagine that that number is higher. That seems staggering to me, that more than 25% of Americans from this study said they had no one that they could share a personal problem with. I find that devastating and sad on so many levels, but I also find that number huge. And when I think about what that means in terms of people in my community, right? I grew up in a really small town of 3,000 people, and I went to high school I graduated with 88 people. So when I think about what that looks like in practice, right? If 25% of my graduating class didn't have anyone to talk to, I could name those people. I could name who that 25% of people were that didn't have somebody to talk to. And when I think about it, I can actually name those people. I can think about who those young people were when I was in high school that didn't have anybody to talk to. And when I think about who they were, because I can remember now, right? Like they were people who came from lower economic backgrounds. They were people who were people of color, definitely queer young people, people who had high ACEs in their family systems. Like you can see how all of these things are connected in so many ways. So this is not meant to start us off on such a low note, but I do think that that is such a staggering statistic, and it puts it into context for us how many people in our communities are struggling just to connect with people even that they know, much less with their broader communities. So I like this definition of social connectedness. It's from Plan H, which is actually a Canadian health organization. And I just like the way that it frames things. Essentially, it's a sense of belonging to a group, family, or community. And it is really about relationships. So it is about the relationships that we have with one another and how we engage with ourselves, with our friends, our family, and our broader community. A socially connected community is a place where everyone feels like they belong. That to me is the critical component, right? Because that also tells us that there are factors in place, there are systems in place that help everyone feel like they belong. And we know that social connection is such an important component of health and well-being. So in connection with this is mattering. So if we think about social connectedness as kind of like the larger scale, is that community sense of belonging. Mattering is more of that individual sense of belonging and value. So mattering is the sense of being significant and valued by other people. And this definition is coming from Gordon Flett, whom Mervyn has worked with often, and he is so delightful. If you haven't had a chance to hear him speak, he makes lots of very dry jokes and talks a lot about pie, but he is very wise. And if we have him speak again, please make time to attend his events because he's wonderful. And he has such astute observations about how young people can be supported in mattering. So what we also know is that social connectedness and mattering are really key protective factors. And that's what, in thinking about how these things are such determinants of health for us, these limit and buffer us from the things, from the challenges that we face in life for everyone. So I like that definition of mattering. And I also like that it is unique for all of us, right? The way that we feel like we have value and we matter to people and matter in our communities is different for all of us. And so I would love for us also to be thinking about what that looks like for each of us. So if you have a minute just to be thinking about what it feels like to be seen, heard, and valued for you personally, what are the things in your life that make you feel valued, that give you a sense of belonging, that contribute to your overall well-being in this sense? Can you name those things? And if you're willing to share them, I would like to hear that too. And maybe I will give us maybe a minute or two just to be thinking about this, because I think that this is a deep question. Maybe it's your cat that makes you feel really seen and heard and valued. And if you have specific instances, I would love that too.
For me, it's expression and interaction. It's to take the road less traveled by, to to feel that I'm going places that haven't been explored, which brings meaning to life for me, that feels like I'm living, and trying to apply a sort of healing nature in my surroundings as much as possible, including internally. So those things are all really important to me and make me feel seen and heard. Yeah, expression's a big one. Art and music.
Thank you. I am in recovery and have been sober for about 3 years now. And I was an alcoholic for 15 years or so. And my closest friend recently gave me a compliment that I think is maybe the nicest compliment anyone has ever given me in my whole life. And I think this is the most wonderful example of being seen that I have ever been given. which is that when I went to go visit her and my nephew about a month ago, unprovoked and unasked for, she said, you know, something that I've really observed about you that has changed over, you know, the more than decade that we've been friends is that you are much more comfortable being in process now than you have ever been before. So like before, where you had to really control the outcome of things, and you had such like a rigid need to know how things were going to end up and be in control of your future and have such, you know, such a strict hold on your life. You have become a very different person who has much less control, a need for control. And that is maybe the most seen I have ever felt in my entire life. And it speaks to the depth of friendship that I have with this person. And I think I will feel loved by that compliment and comment for the rest of my life. It made me feel incredible. And I was so grateful and appreciative of it that I've told her, I think, every day since then, how happy that made me. If we are feeling like this is a hard thing to share or to think about, we can come back to this and move on, and that's okay too. But I do want to, if anyone wants to share, I want to give you space, but I'm happy for us to move on too. Okay. So the flip side of this is the impacts of social isolation. So we know that connectedness and belonging and feeling valued and mattering are so important to our well-being and our health. But we also know that the flip side of that is that the impacts of social isolation are devastating, both individually and to communities. So we have higher rates of violence and crime among people who experience severe social isolation. We know that people who experience social isolation also have lower rates of empathy. We know that social isolation is linked to an increased risk of death for all causes, literally every cause. So that, I think, is also an incredible metaphor for how important social connectedness is. But we also know that there is an incredible economic cost associated with social isolation. And I think that that's important for us to talk about, because the economics of healthcare and social isolation are such drivers for how policy gets created. And so when people understand how money gets budgeted and spent, especially in public health, which, you know, we don't have great messaging in public health. Like, we have the worst messaging in public health about what we do and how we do it and how money gets allocated. And one of the things that I think is so important for us to be talking about with people is that social isolation is a preventable public health issue. And so when we talk about the economics of this, we can point to the fact that, unfortunately, the United States spends the most money on healthcare of any developed nation. And it is a staggering number. So in 2018, it was 17.8% of our gross domestic product, which was $3.8 trillion. That is expected to rise to 26% by 2035. Now, I also just want to say this was before the pandemic. Now, in addition to that, Americans see their doctors less than any other developed nation. And we have worse health outcomes than any other developed nation. So despite the fact that we're spending all of this money on our healthcare, we are not getting the same outcomes that we should be for spending all of this money. In addition to that, we have a workforce that is now becoming very dependent upon our healthcare system. So as of right now, 11% of our workforce works in healthcare in America. That's a huge number. And it is, when we think about variety and dependency, having that much of our economy dependent upon one area is concerning, and we should be concerned about that. But it also means that people have less money to spend on things that give them joy, that offer resiliency, that allow them to pay rent, that allow them to have transportation that's reliable, that allow them to have childcare. So all of the things that would improve quality of life, instead, that money is being funneled into healthcare. So important for us also to be talking about economics in regard to this. Excuse me. So in addition to economic costs, violence, crime, there is a physical impact on our bodies for social isolation. I think these are good statistics and talking points when we talk about social isolation and social connectedness, because I think most people don't understand the physical impact that social isolation has on us. So the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day or having an alcohol use disorder, twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity, linked to depression, poor sleep quality, accelerated cognitive decline, and impaired immunity. There are lots of studies that talk about how folks who live in elderly residential settings, the more engagement that they have with their peers and with younger people, the less likely they are to develop dementia or any kind of cognitive decline. Linked to increases in suicidation and attempts, increased risk of stroke, heart disease, and increased risk of premature mortality. These are really impactful. In addition to that, in thinking about how these spread across epidemics and community issues, social connection and the relationships that we have with others, when we can't get those needs met and we look for them elsewhere, it would make sense that we are in the middle of a staggering opioid crisis, because opioids mimic that feeling of connection and love. And this headline is from last December from the New York Times. If you haven't read it yet, it's worth reading, just because I think it gives words to some things that I think we all maybe intrinsically understood, but there's some new data and new science that supports it, which is that chemically, opioids are replacing some of the things that we have lost societally. It makes sense that that is one of the spurring points for the opioid crisis. So, last year there were huge spikes in deaths caused by overdoses of opioids, 504 in Maine in 2020, which is a 33% increase from 2019. In addition to that, and obviously these things are connected, suicide and is the 9th leading cause of death in Maine. And on average, one person dies by suicide every 32 hours in the state of Maine, which, again, a pretty staggering statistic. So this risk of social isolation contributes in so many ways to grief that touches not only the people that are impacted by it, but every person in that community, right? When someone dies by suicide, when someone dies by overdose, when someone is in the throes of addiction, the ripple effects of those things impact communities for years to come, right? The impact of that is not just economic, it is not just familial, it is community-wide. So how does social connectedness work as one component in public health to prevent those things? Again, social connectedness and support are protective factors. And when we're talking about messaging and how we talk about these things, I think the way that I really like to think about it is that, like, it's a life vest, right? we're thinking about the things that are measures that help us weather some of the challenges that we all face. So I really like to think of it as that protective factor. It's that buffering piece that supports us and through the things that we all face. But it's also really important for us to note that this rise in social isolation did not happen by chance, and that it is impactful across our entire society, right? This is not just happening in Aroostook. This is not just happening in Maine. This is happening everywhere. And there are lots of factors that are at play. But it is also, again, coming back, it is preventable. And when we analyze why things have happened, there are lots of reasons and areas that we can start to address immediately. So community design, social norms, systemic injustices. So we're going to start by talking about how equity plays such a large role in social isolation, connectedness, and mattering. And I want to use an example that I actually got from the Frameworks Institute, because if you are not familiar with the Frameworks Institute, it is one of my favorite nonprofits. They provide messaging and talking points on all kinds of issues that may be difficult to talk about. And they use data and research and science to figure out what is the most impactful way to change people's perceptions or beliefs about those ideas or issues. So if you are a person who is interested in talking about race or the vaccine or anything that might be a controversial topic, they have done research to figure out how to best address those topics with people who might be resistant to change or altering perceptions. And they have created talking points and messaging on how to impactfully and effectively do that. I love them. They have many topics that they offer these things on. They're a wonderful resource. And they have a particular resource on talking about young adulthood and the narrative of adolescence that I think is incredibly helpful and useful. And if you have a chance to look at it, I would highly recommend it. It was a good reframing for me, also as someone who has worked with young people for a long time, to be reframing my own thinking about young people as, well, their brains haven't fully developed, they're risk takers, and to reframe it for myself as this is a time of opportunity and great change and incredible creativity. So in thinking about how equity plays a role in social isolation, this is kind of like the broader context of how we have become disillusioned with our place in society. When we see injustice happening and we recognize that injustice has not been addressed, it has not been acknowledged, and it has not been fixed, we have less faith in the systems that we are a part of. That makes sense to me. But we also, especially as public health folks, can see how the context of how we talk about these things is really important. So there's an example in here, which is from the Frameworks Institute, that I really like, because I think it gives us a clear example of how equity is often masked by statistics and by language choices to provide Band-Aid approaches that do not address root causes. So this example, right, is like, okay, we're going to focus on the negative issue. We're going to problem solve this issue, which is that adolescents from communities of color often have lower high school graduation rates than their white peers. So when we think of that, we think, okay, the problem is that young people of color are not graduating at the same rates as their white peers. That's the problem. But in fact, when we look at this from an equity perspective, we recognize one impact of the history of racial segregation is that schools that serve communities of color tend to have less funding and fewer resources. This is one reason why adolescents of color have lower high school graduation rates than their white peers. That context and that framing allows us an entirely different narrative. And it allows us to address what is actually happening and to create solutions that address the root cause. So when we think about how social isolation and social connectedness are impacted by equity and inequality, I like this example because it helps us understand why people would feel disenfranchised and angry at the systems that they are a part of, when what we focus on is the first example rather than the second example. So when we think about how we can shift this through policy, making social connectedness and equity as a part of our public policy initiatives is one of the ways that we can shift thinking around this. And we really have to do that by focusing on past inequality, acknowledgement, restitution, and change moving forward. We also, in the context of young people, and I talk about this with young people pretty regularly, young people in and of themselves are a group of disenfranchised people, right? They have fewer rights. They often do not have agency to make decisions for themselves. They are often oppressed in ways that we do not pay attention to, do not see, and do not acknowledge. So if we think about equity as ensuring everyone gets what they need, which is the definition that I like best for equity, how do we ensure that everybody gets what they need? Not what is fair, not that everyone gets the same, but that everyone gets what they need. Young people, we know, are not getting what they need. If they were, we wouldn't have such high rates of diseases of despair. We wouldn't have such high rates of suicide ideation and suicide attempts. We wouldn't have such high rates of alcohol and substance misuse or use, and we wouldn't have it at such a young age. So if we're thinking about equity from a youth perspective, if we think about youth as their own population, and we think about programmatic and policy initiatives to support young people in an equitable fashion, we need policies that directly support young people in an equitable fashion also. So if you are working with young people, talking with young people, hanging out with young people in any context, what are some of the things that young people are worrying about right now that decrease their sense of mattering in their communities and the broader world? And I encourage you to think about this really from that equity standpoint, which is that, like, what things are young people are observing in the world around them that they see systems that show them that inequality continues to exist, is not being addressed, and that it harms their chances of a healthy, happy future.
I mean, from my perspective and from what I've communicated with young people, is identity is a major thing, and just the concern of having to suppress things about themselves to stay afloat and to feel welcome, accepted, normal, being able to, like, kind of chip away and cut corners at who they are just to make it in this world. And when they find places where they don't have to do that, and when they see other options on the table of how they can develop themselves, it extremely helps.
Thank you. One that I hear over and over again from young people is climate change.
Oh, absolutely.
I cannot stress enough how angry young people are, how disenfranchised they feel about climate change as something that will impact their futures, that they do not understand why no change is being made. And how they know that it will impact them more than it will impact us.
Yeah.
And they worry.
Yeah, absolutely. Every young person that I've talked to about future definitely talks about climate change, and they also have a surprisingly a lot of them will talk about their, they understand the relationship with climate change and capitalism, and how capitalism is playing a major role in affecting climate change, and really encouraging this really negative direction with it, you know. And when I'm talking with young folks about it, they're also asking them like what they want to do. They want to do something with their future that is helping that direct, you know, is helping things. They don't, it's not, oh, I want to go and, you know, whatever the example would be. But yeah, they want to be a part of actually making things better, but then they don't know where to start with it. You know, they're not really sure where to start, especially in Aroostook County. There isn't really much out there saying like, hey, like, how do we, you know, I mean, I don't, you know, a lot of these kids, their parents aren't even, they don't even believe in climate change, you know, and a lot of this does come down to actually the parents. So.
I think too, if there's family conflict, they do worry about belonging, acceptance. A lot of them worry about their body image, their future. So many things.
There's some unmeetable standards also, the perfectionism of social media creating
Absolutely.
unmeetable standards.
Mhm.
And I think they both recognize that and yet are unable to extricate themselves from it.
That's a good point.
I think social justice issues in general, young people have many things to say about racial injustice. You know, I think they see so much more of the systems that they are a part of, and recognizing that those systems are unjust. You know, I talk about this in other trainings that I do, but there's this moment where children of color for the first time recognize that the world is unfair and unjust, and that race plays a role in that injustice. And it happens at a different age for children of color than it does for white children. I think that is like such a clear example of, you know, this moment in which children are being often conditioned by an experience, and young people as a whole are now being conditioned by experiences that they cannot escape, right? Like climate change, they cannot escape wildfires on the news. They cannot escape eruptions. They cannot escape hurricanes. We cannot escape police brutality. We cannot escape XYZ. And so the continuation of what we are, young people are exposed to, that is much higher, you know, given our media saturation than it was for any of us, also is important to note, right? Is that sheer level of consumption is so much higher than any previous generation, that young people are forced to see the things, the systems that they are a part of in a way that previous generations have not. If anyone else has anything to add to this, I'm very interested in hearing what young people are worrying about, because I think that it's worth us talking about those things, but I'm also happy for us to move on. I want to be thoughtful about our time. So in thinking about this, one of the ways that we combat this, and this is an example that I got from Out Maine. This is supported by quite a large body of evidence, is that when young people and adults also see that when the most marginalized community members are being taken care of, outcomes improve for everybody. So the example that Out Maine uses is that when schools have gay, straight, trans alliances, health outcomes and educational outcomes for all students improve. So the power of taking care of the whole is so powerful that it allows young people to be comfortable being themselves They see other people being taken care of as themselves. They are allowed to be their authentic selves. I think that that is such a powerful message for communities as a whole. That translates so well to me, right? If we're using the example of a small ecosystem of a school, but translating that to a broader community perspective, that makes so much sense to me. That when we see that the people with the most needs are having those needs met, we don't question that our needs will also be met. So what does that mean in terms of policy for us? It means affordable housing. It means accessible public transportation. It means public spaces. In thinking about coming back to equity, clean energy, it's thinking about infrastructure investments that support the well-being and health of all of our community members. So I want to talk about one example, and we got started a little bit later. I do want to be respectful of time. What time should I make sure that I am wrapped up by?
Well, I think we're looking at this topic. We were targeting another 20 minutes,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Okay.
But that also includes a few points that Meg, you'll be making. So, yeah.
I can wrap.
I don't need much time at all, Sultana, so.
Okay. So I want to talk about one specific example of how strong public policy and intentional planning and development can really transform communities. And I'm using an urban example, but I think it's really impactful because the key here is that it did not do any of this by raising taxes. So there is a wonderful book called New Localism. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend it. It is about how communities are leveraging public-private partnerships and different opportunities to create a different kind of essentially urban planning or community planning. And the example that I like best out of this book is about Copenhagen, but they also talk about Indianapolis and Pittsburgh in this book as examples of modern revitalization of communities that were devastated by the loss of economic opportunities, loss of steel mills, etc. So 30 years ago, Copenhagen had a 17.5% unemployment rate. It was losing its manufacturing opportunities. It had an annual budget deficit of 750 million. And today that is the absolute reverse, totally changed city. And the way that Copenhagen did this is by not raising taxes, but by leveraging existing assets. So it had this waterfront underdeveloped site that it used, created as a public access space that it transformed, it rezoned it and transformed it into affordable housing and mixed use residential and commercial space. So throughout the development of this, they did a couple of things. One, they added nearly 3 meters of soil that they dug out from the city to create new public transportation so that they raised the level of the city to address climate change. That's one thing. So they took what was already existing within the city. They didn't have to truck in soil from anywhere, but they created this new transportation system that they then used the soil that they dug out from this clean transportation system to raise the city to address climate change. And then 25% of all of the new affordable housing all of the housing units had to be available to lower income residents. In addition to that, they had intergenerational structure and housing systems in place. So they had mixed use residential homes for nursing and childcare. They had hospitals that were near art and culture centers. They had mixed use residential and retail facilities so that the entire section of the city that was revitalized was integrated to be community friendly. It has entirely changed the health and well-being of the city. Copenhagen is one of the healthiest cities in the entire world at this point. It is a fabulous example of how intentional community development, planning, and equity create opportunities for community resilience. And when you see what that has meant for the city, both in terms of economic opportunity and health and well-being of residents, it is truly incredible. So I strongly encourage you to look at the example of how Copenhagen did this. It's useful in any context because it explains how they leveraged public assets in order to create this opportunity for the city. It did not require any extra outside money or funding or raising of taxes from citizens. And it's a really interesting and innovative design. So a little bit about this intergenerational importance. This is one of the key components of an integrated community that supports the health and well-being of social connectedness. Cannot stress enough how important intergenerational relationships and connectedness are. I mentioned that, they had co-located adult and child care centers, senior centers within schools, Head Start programs in nursing homes, et cetera. I love these ideas. I think that they are low lift for many communities, just require creative planning. Coming back to public infrastructure investments, a lot of the language on this is from a wonderful report that Keeney shared with me called Healthy Places by Design, and it is in the shared drive under a folder called Social Connectedness Resources. You can look at it. I took notes when I was reading all of these things, so I've linked to where the resources at the top of the notes, and then I've just created like an abstract or my thoughts about what was in the report so that you don't necessarily have to read the whole report if you don't have time to do that. This one is called Healthy Places by Design. And one of the things that I love about how they frame talking about public infrastructure investments is that it talks about how the way that your community looks is an external visualization of what your community's values and identity are. So the way that your community looks and the way that your community invests in how it looks is that external validation of what your community needs. And so investing in public spaces where people can gather and spend time with one another is a thing that often gets put to the back burner in terms of budgetary concerns, but often has such an impact on creating connection. There are some examples from that report that I really liked about creative applications for public spaces. And at the bottom is an example of things that could be done in rural areas. So gathering places like libraries, town halls, trailheads. I really liked that one. I live in rural Vermont, and I don't think anyone has ever gathered at a trailhead in my community, but there is a brand new organization in my hometown that is creating mountain biking trails. And last weekend, there were 50 people at the opening of the mountain biking trail, which that was the first time I'd ever heard of anything like that. It was really exciting. So lots of interesting and creative examples that do not require money, right? Allowing fire pits during the winter in public parks to or encourage socializing, inviting people to be creative with spaces, with movable furniture, thinking about policies that impact specific populations. One example, especially when we think about young people, there are particular laws that deeply impact young people. Curfews, anti-loitering laws. These are anti-youth laws specifically, right? They are meant to keep young people from gathering, and they impact how young people spend time with each other and in their communities. Just gonna keep going. So in thinking about this, what public infrastructure investments would be most impactful in Aroostook? And what are the barriers that keep some of those investments from happening? And what are some of the supports that could create the scaffolding necessary for those investments? I recognize that our timing is running, so I would love for you to be taking this as a question that you take with you, to be thinking about policy initiatives that Aroostook could be using to support this idea of social cohesion and connectedness. So bringing this back to young people. So according to the MIHAS in 2019, 43% of high school students felt like they did not matter in their communities. So almost half of young people. In that same survey, 20% of middle school students said that they had seriously thought about suicide. But the alternative to that, so coming back to the positive of this, is that social connectedness and strong social connectedness and networks can boost a person's lifespan by 50%. So even though social isolation can increase risk of death by all causes, strong social connections can boost a person's lifespan by 50%. And young people who feel connected to and valued by their communities, less likely to start use of substances at an early age, less likely to engage in risky behaviors, less likely to experience diseases of despair, less likely to have problems with behavioral health, less likely to engage in criminal activity. And all of these things, of course, put a strain on systems that are already taxed and underfunded, which of course has ripple effects within the community. In addition to that, and thinking about how we are losing young people in New England, young people are fleeing our communities much of the time. Young people who feel connected to and valued by their communities are more likely to stay or return to those communities, which builds workforce capacity, which we desperately need. They invest their time, their financial resources, and their energy into their communities. They raise their own families in their communities. They have intergenerational relationships with other community members, which decreases social isolation in elderly populations, and they participate in community events. So there are multiple prongs of strategies to improve mattering for young people. So school and community strategies include peer-to-peer mentoring, opportunities for volunteering, creating mattering interactions or visual representations of mattering. And then individual strategies, spending time with people, learning to be a good and active listener, allowing for others to have voice and agency, acknowledging when someone has been missed, and remembering things that are important to others. These are just some small examples. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you so much for listening. I am so grateful for everybody offering their thoughts and for letting me talk.
Sultana, thank you so much. That was so helpful. Hi, Kate, welcome. I just want to acknowledge that you said there's something going down in Presque Isle regarding the Nordic Heritage Center. Do you want to say a little more about?
I know nothing more. I'm actually mostly putting it out to Meg and Rachel and Damian to find out if they know why Presque Isle has a workshop tomorrow night, and the only thing on the agenda says Nordic Heritage. And Nordic Heritage is saying we should all show up to support them, but nobody is answering. And I was wondering if anybody knew, because it is definitely one of those places that Sultana was talking about.
It doesn't look like anybody is in the know. I don't know.
I don't know anything about it.
All right. Well, I'm going to drop 2 emails right now while we're moving on in the agenda and just see if anyone knows. So stay tuned, because why not? Since it's real time and we're going to want to know. Meg, do you want to take us to the next part of the agenda?
Sure. So I felt like the work that Sultana has done has been absolutely critical, and really sort of the less familiar work related to these particular social determinants of health. So when it comes to nutritional security, I think Bronson had talked with us the very first gathering that we had, and did a nice job of kind of describing the difference between food security and nutritional security. And I didn't want to just repeat all of that. So really, the one thing that I thought might just kind of summarize a little bit maybe is the, and I'll go ahead and share my own screen here. So this is actually taken from the request for proposals that our grant submission was written in response to, and there were a variety of social determinants of health. And so it's interesting to me that the sort of the cross pollination perhaps of the different factors. So the things that Sultana is talking about can be addressed from a variety of different perspectives, right? And so some of those are the built environment, some of what she was just addressing. And so those are some of the possibilities that can be addressed through these different accelerator plans that we're tasked with. So built environment is identified as one way of approaching the variety of social determinants of health to make communities healthier. And so the way these were all broken out was by the option for the priority area, the impact, and then the strategy. They are simply examples, right? So ways that some communities might choose to address that particular issue. So built environment is one. Then community clinical linkages is another. So how to increase effective utilization of healthcare clinical settings. And then, so the two that, and then obviously some of these have a lot more examples than others. So when it comes to food and nutrition security, what we're really looking at is access to and routine consumption of adequate nutritious food, right? So there are a variety of different components there. So, and then there's another piece that actually is not mentioned in this particular page, but is mentioned elsewhere in the document that I'll get at, that talks more about the cultural appropriateness of the food as well. And so in that regard, actually, I'll switch to this one. So according to CDC, right, they're the ones who essentially put this whole thing together. So food and nutrition security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to food, which is safe, consumed in sufficient quantity and quality to meet dietary needs and food preferences. And similar to what Sultana was saying, you know, it's not just about social connectedness, it's about the culture, the structure, all of these things that enable or create boundaries towards social connection. Same kind of thing exists with food security and nutritional security, right? If there's not adequate sanitation, you're not getting appropriate food and nutrition, and all of those kinds of things. So it's a multifaceted definition, which requires a multifaceted approach. So some of the examples that they have are, I think, kind of just to get things, get conversations started. I think in our case, there are much, well, I guess my 2 cents would be that there are infinitely more creative possibilities, I think, particularly in our area. But some of the things that they talk about are, there definitely are some policy work here, right? So, but increasing access to fruits and vegetables, farmers markets, food banks, healthcare systems, all of those kinds of things. And then increasing acceptance of food assistance and nutrition incentive vouchers. ACAP does the SNAP Ed and WIC benefits and all of those kinds of things. We often hear that people will not, even if they might qualify, they want others to get assistance. They think that others are more needy than they are. And so sometimes they will not apply, rather than sometimes it's the attitude that there's a limited amount of resources. And if they take some of that funding, that they will be denying it to someone else. And that's rarely the case. Usually the benefits are expanded, and for our area in particular, the resources are provided to meet the need. And so if they would apply for the need, then we'd be able to meet that need. So there are some other things, the healthy food service guidelines at institutions, work sites, early care and education. That's a fair amount of what our 5210 Let's Go program works on. They work with schools in particular around those nutritional guidelines. And then working with other, certainly we have Share the Harvest and gleaning and things that happen here in Aroostook County that attempt to improve. So all of that to say, and there's a lot of the data that is available in that shared drive as well. The area hospitals put together the community health needs assessment. And so there have been things that have improved. And so some things are kind of getting better and some things are not so great. And I think for our purposes, it's interesting that household access to nutritionally adequate food has been improving. So lacking access has decreased, which means they're getting more access, right? At the same time, high school students are not necessarily reporting that they are eating in healthier habits when you're looking at 5 or more servings of fruit and vegetables per day. So a bit of a disconnect there, which I think is one of the reasons it makes sense for us to target or to focus particularly on young people, right? If we can change the diets of or the nutritional security of young people, then that will have a ripple effect. And so you have others compared to the state health data. Aroostook County has much higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, all of the things that are kind of typical health determinants and the things that get measured by our healthcare system, which again is one of the reasons that Aroostook County was awarded this planning grant, because it's pretty clear that the need is more substantial in Aroostook County than the state, and the need throughout the state is pretty high. So, and everything, the other piece is that there's a lot of measurements that are specific to middle school and high school students, and typically the health disparities for those ages are worse than, so free and reduced school lunch for very young children might be, eating those lunches on a more regular basis than middle schoolers and high schoolers are, those kinds of things. So we've also found that one of the, there's been some research to show of things that young people wish they had learned in school that they are not learning in schools anymore is food preparation. And so that's one of the components, I guess, that impacts nutritional security, is that if they have access to food, they don't necessarily know what to do with it. They're not being taught those life skills that once upon a time would have been taught through the school system. So that's kind of the short gist. I think there's lots of room for creativity in how we make the connection. The other thing that is shared in the Google Drive is Maine's plan, the governor's plan to end hunger in the state by 2030. And that report similar to the information that Sultana was presenting, recognizes the vast number of factors, from transportation to economic security to energy access to all sorts of different factors that go into ending hunger, workforce development, the whole gamut. And so just to recognize that all of these are incredibly complicated issues, and yet we have before us a large task and tons of opportunities for creatively approaching these issues. That's the extent of my.
Thanks, Meg. Questions or additions, anyone? Okay.
I just wanted to say also, just in terms of resources and things that do a good job of presenting how systems are so interconnected. I'm reading this book right now. Well, of course, my background is blurred. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm not going to be able to figure this out quickly, so I'm not going to do it. It's called Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health. It's by Leanna Wen, W-E-N. She is a former, I think, public health commissioner of the city of Baltimore. And she's an emergency room doctor. She does such a beautiful job of building the kind of foundational building blocks for explaining how all of these components live together in public health. And I have found it very useful in building talking points for myself about the connections between all of those systems. And it's well written. It's like an interesting read. It's not a dry public health book. So if you're looking for supporting resources and how to be thinking and talking about those interconnected factors, I would recommend this. I'm not finished with it yet, but it's good.
Thank you, Sultana. Yeah, so thank you both for this update. And I'm wondering, Meg in particular, if Amber isn't here and probably won't be with us next time, that's an assumption I'm stating that may be inaccurate. I think we're going to need to be making provisions as she transitions out to get the youth engagement piece back into this discussion, right?
Yeah, so my understanding is that group met. They have the survey per se. They developed some questions, and that is essentially ready to go. So I can, once I get that information, I can send that out by email with everyone and ask for input that way. I think that's probably going to be a better approach. And the resource identification was the other subgroup that had met, and I know Sultana was part of that. My understanding was that Aaron had agreed to kind of take that on, and I thought he was going to be with us today. So I don't know if you have any more of an update on that, Sultana.
Yeah, I can just give you a brief update. So when I had suggested this model last meeting, we got a little off track into what I had been thinking about, which was something really basic, like a Google spreadsheet where everyone in the community could edit and add their own information, because I felt like that gave it shared responsibility and community ownership, as opposed to us owning and maintaining and being kind of gatekeepers of information. And so our group met and kind of reoriented ourselves to having something that didn't require us to be taking information from people and entering it and creating this really high lift database. And so Aaron agreed to do some research on what the kind of easiest and least labor intensive offering for that would be, and to create kind kind of like a spreadsheet that had a number of columns that allowed people to enter in the relevant information. And the hope on this really was that it would be like a community document, so that if you were a part of an organization that you wanted your information to be on this document, you would just add your own information, so that there wasn't this sense of this is owned by ACAP or this is owned by this person that you had to reach out to in order to get your information on there. So the update that I can give you is that Erin is working on that, and that is it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm thinking about where we go from here in terms of highest and best use of our next meeting. Ideally, we can pull the what you were just describing, the spreadsheet, the community-owned, sort of document into the discussion. And I'm wondering where you collectively, or what each of you thinks about where we should be going next. Like, what would be most helpful and why? The youth engagement piece is clearly part of this process, so we don't want to get too far out without being very intentional about those voices. On the other hand, I'm sure there's work that can be done between now and then, in addition to the survey question review, and in terms of thinking about what else we need to be accomplishing. And I just wonder, one thing that might help, Meg, I don't know if you still have it open, but the actual work plan, or the document that went with the application, so we can sort of look. But before we do that, I'm wondering if people have other ideas about what would best prepare the group to begin to do the work of creating the accelerator plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If people have thoughts.
I think it would be something that helps me prepare is regular communication. And I'm sorry I was not here at the beginning. I have a conflict weekly, but usually I can skip it, and I couldn't this week. So I don't know what the deal is with Amber. So I might be asking too much here, but I didn't get any of those other meeting options, so was not included in those. So I don't know what happened at like the youth meeting or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah,
this is a very small committee, so I would be, the more information, the better, because yeah, there's a lot of information coming at us.
Yeah, I think, Kate, that's fair. And from a process perspective, one of the things that Meg, you led with at the beginning of the meeting was just saying, that we know Amber's transitioning out. So we didn't get very far into this process before having her accept a different role at ACAP. So she's going to be transitioning out in a way that is ultimately beneficial to this project and is arguably a good use of her time and talents. It means that we are in the midst of a role shift, and Bronson is going to be absorbing some of her responsibilities. So I'm acknowledging that. And I think what I'm hearing you really say is, what could we do to set us up for success in this configuration by having information out in preparation for this meeting, and get people doing the thinking between meetings and not waiting for the meeting to be calling the questions, right? That may not be what you meant. Maybe that's what I wanted you to mean. I'm not sure. But yeah.
Is there?
Go ahead, Sultan. Sorry.
I'm just wondering if there is technological support in this that could help us in more regular communication, or that's a little less onerous than like waiting for people to email or if we have questions or, and I don't have an answer to that question. That was just like for instance, I'm on another work group and we have a Slack channel that everybody just throws resources into or asks questions. And so I'm not suggesting that. I am just asking if there are other things that are available to us that make this an easier option, that allow us more streamlined communication, that I'm putting that question out into the ether.
I'll just share from an ACAP perspective. What we use often for project management and for this sort of thing is Teams. And I know that wasn't, it's not accessible to everyone. So I'm not familiar with any other, and I don't know what the learning curve is for the other options. I will go ahead, if it's okay, and share the work plan because I think it might be helpful at this point.
Here, so Sultana, I'm holding your question and I'm not forgetting it or moving on. Kate, you were going to say something, and I just wanted to get you in on this.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you. I was just going to say that you very nicely said what I was thinking in my head and did not manage.
Oh yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, so I think we're all sort of like, let's do a good job of getting more intentionally connected and more routine basis and not waiting for the monthly meetings. And Sultana, you were problem solving by saying, would an ongoing platform besides email support us in that? I don't know if anybody has an opinion about Slack or any other sort of, I mean, we have our Google Drive, right? And we're using that for storage, but that's not the same thing as connecting. And I wonder if people use other platforms or any other platform and are open to that, or if you're sort of like, I can't check one more thing and we should use email because the group is small. I think we do need to use this time today as we're reorienting with Amber transitioning out and Bronson, who's not here, obviously transitioning in to some capacity to try to figure this out. Like do people like other platforms than email? Do you have opinions? Damian, Kate, Rachel, thoughts?
I also use Teams, and I was just exploring while we were talking whether or not it's possible to make a Teams group with external people, and it does appear to be so. So I'm practicing on Meg.
Oh,
right now.
All right, that's excellent because I know a lot of my clients use Teams, and historically, even with the main climate council, they've told us that if I'm an external party, I can't ping people with the same system that the internal people use. So I don't actually know. I think it's great to try to practice.
It may be in your email, Meg.
This is Rachel. I'm comfortable with email and Google Drive. I don't have access to Teams, and I'm not sure what Slack or whatever the other program that was just mentioned offers. That's different from a storage like Google Drive. I'm not sure.
So Tana, do you want to explain like why people use
What did it
Slack?
offer? Yeah.
Slack is essentially like a messaging and storage app. So you can add links, you can have a chat feature, you can upload documents. It is like a real-time app. So you can choose to have notifications or not, depending upon how accessible and connected you would like to be. The thing that I like about Slack is that it is like one continuous feed. So you can scroll through to keep track of commentary. You can, it's a linear option. So you don't have to be searching multiple emails. It's one thread. Everything lives in one thread.
And it's a free app.
Yes.
Looks like
I don't
that.
know. I'm not sure how many people you can have in the free version, but I think we're okay.
I'm pretty sure I've never had to pay for it, and I've used it for several organizations use it for their work groups.
I'm certainly game to create that.
Yeah, I think maybe we give it a try. I mean, another one that groups, I feel like I'm on all platforms for different projects, but another one that people like because it's cheap, it's free, and it's easy to use, and it also just keeps like you can just look through the entire conversation thread. You don't have to look at different emails. Like it's just one rolling stream of consciousness from beginning to end of all conversations is the Google Chat feature. And it does the same thing. You can create a small group and it does the same thing, and it just pops up on your screen, so you don't have to remember to check it. But I think maybe Meg, if you want to work with Bronson, and we can just experiment with Slack and see and make sure those who aren't here today understand that we're trying it as a platform. That might be good. Is everybody open to that experiment? It's just going to be an experiment. If we don't like it or we don't use it, then we know the experiment. We learned from the experiment, right?
I promise not to be personally offended if it does not work out.
Okay, good, Sultana. Thank you. Thank you for modeling, making it okay. Just because it was your idea. We're not rejecting you, maybe just the idea, but we don't even know that yet. All right. We'll give it a whirl. So stay tuned on that front. Okay, with your permission, I'll turn us to the work plan. We have a few, we have a good 15 minutes to look at this. Does that make sense? So we know we're getting recommendations on youth engagement, and we need that soon. And so let's assume that will be a top priority for our April meeting, and that we'll have something circulated before the meeting, just so we can all be thinking about that and the survey questions that it sounds like are part of that recommendation. And then let's just look at where we are. We started talking about number 3. Evidence-based, what I was hearing was that evidence-based strategies for opportunities to impact social connectedness, right? We heard some of that. Is there more that we want to learn there? Thoughts about where we are in this workflow generally? Does it feel clear to you? Are you like, I don't know where we are. I don't know where we're headed. Damian?
It feels pretty clear where we're going with this. I think we have a pretty strong idea of what we need to focus on. I think we've got some good ideas on how to approach it. I don't know if this is the right time, but I did actually reach out to little under a dozen folks from 16 to 18, 19 years old and asked them questions about this stuff, and totally down to just kind of let you folks know what they were saying whenever there's the appropriate time to do that. Just letting you know.
Yeah, why don't you share, and just for our learning, so we can learn from you, how did you go about asking? Like what did you, how did you set it up? Yeah.
Mostly I'm just friends with them and connected with them through being a musician and artist locally and in the state of Maine, and also through my record store. Kids come into the record store all the time, so I've made a lot of friends that way, and they have a pretty good trust for me in a really positive way, you know. So I was texting and phone calling, basically. Just, I don't really do too much social media, you know, so it's I just went kind of direct with it. But overall, I was asking them questions about why did they leave? You know, what, you know, thoughts on food and their diets and stuff. And I mean, there was actually some reoccurring things for sure about, you feel like there's nothing to do here, you know, there's nowhere to go, sort of thing. You know, already the seasons are something against already other issues that we have, you know, so winter is depressing for people. So that on top of all these other things, you know, it really doesn't help. When I was asking them about what would they like to see change in the community when it comes to social interaction and stuff. I mean, I know we were talking about, well, we have plenty of nature here, but in truth, a lot of kids were saying, hey, where's the park with like an event space there that also includes a place for teenagers to also have a certain level of privacy, while at the same time they can have an option of public connection, you know, so that they can still be teenagers in one place and then go over here and, you know, be more like connected with all ages and, you know, in community activities and stuff. There was definitely a lot of talk about skate parks and things like that. And yeah, something that's, you know, yeah, like outdoors events, things that we all just feel like there's nothing that they can like really have a connection with in the area. When it came to food, it honestly, it seemed a lot of them hinted or just outright were like expressing that they do have an eating disorder of some kind, and that their relationship with food is very much based around, even if they see things online, it can be based around just what their parents are feeding them. And which brings a lot of thought to me of just also making sure that we're educating the parents in the situation, instead of just trying to reach out to the kids, because who's buying the food, you know, who's actually, you know, getting this stuff to them. Yeah, they just can't relate to the culture, you know, that they see on the internet to what they see in their community. And that's one reason that a lot of folks and younger people are leaving, because they just aren't finding what they're seeing on the internet, you know, and they're finding themselves expressing themselves in a certain way through the internet, but not the same way that they would be doing in their community if we had things that we could all do together, basically, you know. And so that is definitely something that seemed to be a big thing. It's like, why are you leaving? Why, you know, because I do hear it a lot from young people of like, they all are planning on leaving, you know, when they get out of high school, and it's not always for school, you know. And when they do leave and they are going to college, it is all environmental that they're thinking environmentally, like something they want to help the world. And yeah, the food stuff, it was definitely, they weren't eating very well, you know. There was an absolute, you know, they're not eating, you know, there's a lot of carbs, there's a lot of sugar, they're eating there's not a lot of education in their food. And yeah, the relationship with farming and sort of things that are only a couple generations away, that, as we were talking about, is missing from the education system. It's also missing from the community. When and before, people were out there growing food, they knew how to grow food, and it wasn't just learning in school. They were learning in their community because they were involved in the community that way. That isn't the same anymore. And so it's not even something that's on the radar always. I didn't see a lot of kids talking about it in a way that, I don't think they're even aware of they're not eating well. They're aware of their eating disorders. And it is very much because of, there's like vanity and like the pressure of the internet and the sort of thing, and that sort of perfection like pressure. But yeah. And then there was just a level of depression that seemed to be pretty, obvious with everybody. And it's more than just being a teenager. So yeah, that's basically it.
Damian, just for my learning and maybe the learning of others, you mentioned that you have ties with youth around the state. Are most of the kids with whom you spoke about this topic in Aroostook County?
Yes.
Okay.
There was only one person, and they were down in Portland. But mostly it was just, I tried to keep it as local as possible. But it is, because I mean, we're thinking Aroostook County wise, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was asking. And we talked a little bit about this last time, but could you share their email addresses so they could get a survey? Or is there a way to give you the survey to get that to them? Or, you know what I mean?
You're trying to spread that with them. I don't know how everyone's going to feel about, like, it's got to be their option. There's a certain level of, like, I don't know if everyone's comfortable just being put on the spot. I don't think that's what you're implying, but just to like make sure, yeah, I will definitely, once there's a survey and stuff, I'll get it to as many of those young people as possible. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think these things are always opt-in, right? Respond if you're willing.
Right.
Yeah, no mandatory. Thanks so much,
Yeah.
Kate. I'm noting that in the chat, you mentioned your primary care referred you to a multi-level marketing salesperson. So
And if that's what they're doing to the kids.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is that something that we might want to be better understanding in terms of how people are being resourced, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have to wonder what if my doctor, who is, I thought, relatively enlightened, is doing that, like their first decision to refer was not to an actual dietitian. It was to somebody who paid money to get product to sell.
Wow. So
you gotta think that they're, that the kids are seeing that too.
Well, and probably if that's happening, being confused by it, thinking that maybe that's how this works. This is how it works, right? This is how nutrition works.
Because it's, I mean, what happened to me is entirely a restrictive eating deal. And, for somebody who has eating disorders, it would not be a good thing.
Right.
For a kid to be referred to that.
Thank you for being willing to share that. I mean, we have a few minutes left. I'm wondering if there are other things in preparation for our next meeting in April, if there are other things you want to learn and focus on in preparation for, feeling like you have adequate information to begin to, create the draft and accelerator plan, because ultimately that's where we're going. We want to be able to say, what are our priorities, and talk about that. And, but in order to do that, I wonder if what other learning you'd like to do?
I'm not thinking necessarily about learning, but I am thinking about reflective process.
Okay.
And thinking, I was coming back to the questions that I was hoping that we would have, a full group to be brainstorming and thinking about, again, information that we need from community in order to craft this accelerator plan. And so, and also, our own generative process and brainstorming. I was coming back to those questions that I was asking, like, what are the barriers to the public infrastructure investments? What are the supports that would scaffold those kinds of things being done? And so I like those kinds of questions, the open-ended questions that offer creativity and opportunity for generative discussion and like just kind of creative thinking outside of the traditional avenues of how we approach problem solving for these kinds of things. And so I wonder if there is like a shared process for coming up with questions that guide us in this process too, a little bit. Does that make sense?
I'll put you on the spot and you can pass. Is there an example of a question? I mean, the note I'm making is go back and look and I captured some of the questions you brought up in your PowerPoint. Is there an example that you think is especially true to the approach you're recommending right now?
No, I don't actually have a specific set of questions, but
Okay.
in thinking about what are the experiences that young people are getting from their doctors? Like, what are the resources that are available around nutrition? What kind of education are people getting about nutrition in Aroostook? And like, are we building critical thinking skills about nutrition? Like, it's one thing for us to be offering people like the pyramid of nutrition. Do they do that anymore? I don't know. But like, are we also, Damian, I heard you say that young people don't even necessarily know that they're not eating healthily. And so like, is our approach that we offer them education? Is our approach that we offer them access? Is our approach that we offer services? Or are we helping build critical thinking skills? So those are the kinds of questions that I think that with a variety of perspective and experience on the work group could offer creative solution or problem solving.
Thank you. Well, one thing we can do too, as we're sort of doing the setup for the next meeting, is query people and make sure they're available, because we chose this time on this day of the month based on what we thought was going to work for people, right? And so we can circle back on that and make sure that still holds. We're really missing at this point Erin and Bronson, I think. Amber would have been here, right? But she's not.
Dawn Roberts is the other one
Oh, thank you.
today.
Okay.
And I like the idea of some sort of generative question, Sultana, and I can kind of, can you email me the presentation, or maybe it's already in the Google Drive, your slides?
I can upload it to the Google Drive.
That would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, So we're going to leave today, depart a little bit raggedy, but we're going to get our act together as our new team is forming, and make sure that you are well prepared for our next session. So thanks for your patience. Please come back. And if anyone finds out what's going on with the Nordic Heritage Center, please email all of us, because it's turning out to be a bigger mystery than just this group. And it probably has a community impact. So we want to know, right? Okay, so stay tuned, and thanks for today. And I think that's it for right now, actually. Unless anybody has anything else. Got any shout outs? Anybody want to share any announcements or anything while we've got each other? Anything going on we need to know
I
about?
learned one thing that had me thinking about this project, so I'll just share that. I have a friend who teaches down at Katahdin schools, and they have a huge focus on outdoor learning. And one of the assets or resources that helped them establish that is Food Corps, which I did not know existed, but maybe you all do. It's not an AmeriCorps program. Well, I don't know if it is, but it's an independent 501c3 working specifically within school systems. And so that's the way in which they did a whole bunch of raised beds and planted an orchard, and they have Food Corps volunteers, stipended volunteers who come in for a year of service, who help maintain, and they do a lot of education in the school, science and art classes and all kinds of things outside in the orchards and with the raised beds and all of that. And I thought, oh, like, cool, there's a resource, right? So when it comes to, I think, identifying assets and gaps, part of it for me is just that I don't know what I don't know.
Right. And it doesn't look by watching faces that other people know about Food Corps. Right, yeah, nobody knows. Keeney, thank you. That's a great example, Meg.
I just want to say hi and introduce myself to Kate. I'm Keeney from the Maine Resilience Building Network. Hi, yeah, and thank you.
Kate, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Kenny. I am Kate. I am here with Pride Aroostook. On the other hand, my 8 to 5, 9 to 5, whatever the heck, it's ending at 8 tonight. Job is I'm the Housing Services Coordinator and Economic Justice Coordinator with the Maine Coalition to End Domestic Violence. So I spend my time thinking about that. This Food Corps thing is amazing, Meg.
I'm going to look it up. Now that we go. Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just
That's
looking
where
at
that
you.
next section on the plan about, other evidence-based strategies for opportunities. I don't even know what all of those would be.
Right. And that may be, well, that may be what we can use the spreadsheet for, but it also may be that we need to do a very large shout out to say to people who's working on this, right?
I think that would be the other thing with that is to find out who's doing what already in Aroostook. Because I do think that there are things happening, and I'm just not, I don't know if they really want to be involved, just like what they're actually doing, things like that. But there's definitely people interested in this topic who have other things that they're doing.
Yeah.
It's made me think about how there's not a food not bombs here in Aroostook County. I don't know if you folks are familiar with that, but they're pretty common in a lot of cities. But it's a way that people come out and there's free food, and sometimes there's music and even like educational pamphlets and stuff. And I don't know, maybe I should try to get one going this summer. And just reach out. I don't know, I'd probably just go online and find out how that works, but free food's a good start somewhere, and music and something to get people to come out is something. I mean, it's what it comes down to is that we have to approach this from a lot of different places, while at the same time absolutely find out a core, potentially really get in there and nurture it.
This is the organization that essentially, did write the governor's plan against hunger, is the Resources for Organizing and Social Change. And I'll pop their email or their website into the chat. But they are a heck of a group. And they would love, I think, probably to have some more connection to Aroostook County, because they don't have much, but they seem to want to.
I also just threw something into the chat, which is that Vermont has had an incredible amount of money funneled into the Vermont Farm to Plate network. And they have created a resource about exploring food system careers that just came out. And so in thinking about how that systems integration works, right? Like, how are we addressing food insecurity through supporting systems like workforce development and encouraging the system to align itself with new visions. This was interesting to me, just in that they were like, how do we support farmers? How do we support the system itself also? So it's an interesting read.
Yeah, it seems, I'm just quickly looking at it, it seems very detailed. Great. Okay. All right, thank you. Can't wait to look at the resources for organizing and social change. And just want to acknowledge we're at time, a little bit over. So thank you for your patience and your good work, and we will keep this conversation going. Okay, thank you so much.